The church calendar on our refrigerator was the first place Ellen hid him, which sounds ridiculous until you understand how much of our life ran through that church. If Ellen wrote committee meeting in blue marker on a Thursday night, I treated it like weather. It was just something that was happening, and there was no point questioning it. We had been married 14 years by then. I owned a small residential painting business, mostly repaints, rental turnovers, cabinet jobs, when the money was good. Ellen worked part-time as an office manager at a dental clinic 3 towns over, but if you asked people who she was, they would have said church first. She organized the meal trains when somebody had surgery. She kept track of who needed rides, who had a new baby, who needed help after a funeral. She knew which older couples didn't like casseroles with onions. People trusted her with little private pieces of their lives because she always looked like she could handle one more thing. That was part of what made me feel stupid later. Not because she volunteered, not because she cared what people thought. I felt stupid because I had watched her build a whole reputation on being dependable, and then I let that reputation answer questions for me before I even asked them. Our marriage wasn't awful before all this. That's important. We weren't one of those couples screaming in the driveway or sleeping in separate rooms. We had normal problems. I worked too much in the spring and summer. She thought I came home with paint on my clothes and half my attention, still on bids and invoices. I thought she said yes to too many people and then acted resentful when she was tired. We had the same argument in different outfits for years. But we still ate dinner together most nights. We still watched old crime shows on the couch. We still sat in the same pew every Sunday, 3rd row on the left, because Ellen said the air conditioning hit too hard near the back. She would squeeze my hand during the last hymn, and I never thought to wonder whether that meant anything or was just part of the routine. The late meetings started in the fall. At first, it was nothing dramatic. She said the church was trying to reorganize the benevolence fund, and there were too many moving pieces. That sounded exactly like Ellen. She came home with folders under her arm, complained about people not replying to emails, and dropped her keys in the little ceramic bowl by the door like she always did. I remember asking if she wanted me to pick up dinner one Thursday, and she said, "Don't worry about me. I'll grab something after the meeting if it runs long." It made sense. That's the irritating part. The lie fit inside her real life so neatly that there was no reason to pull at it. Ellen had always been the woman people called after hours. If a family needed groceries or a shut-in needed someone to check on them, she went. If the pastor's wife asked for help setting up tables, Ellen went. If someone had to make 20 phone calls because nobody else wanted to, Ellen did it and then sighed about it in the kitchen afterward. The first thing that bothered me was small, and I almost hate saying it because it sounds petty. She started dressing nicer for those meetings. Not flashy. Ellen wasn't flashy. But there was a difference between the sweater she wore to sit in a classroom at church and the blouse she wore when she wanted people to notice she looked put together. She started using perfume again on weeknights. She would stand in front of the hallway mirror and put on earrings for a room full of folding chairs and paper agendas. One Thursday, I was leaning against the bedroom doorframe while she fastened a bracelet, and I said, "Big crowd tonight?" She looked at me through the mirror. "What?" "I don't know. You look nice." She gave a little laugh, not mean, just quick. "Russ, I'm allowed to look nice when I leave the house." I remember raising my hands a little, like I had stepped on something by accident. "I didn't say you weren't." She went back to the bracelet. "It's just easier if I go straight from work." That answer worked. It did. She worked at the dental clinic that day, so maybe she had dressed for that. Maybe she was tired of me noticing only when I had a reason to question it. I told myself that before she even left the room. By the time her SUV backed out of the driveway, I had already decided I was being unfair. Still, I stood in the kitchen longer than I needed to. The microwave clock said 6:42. Her meeting was supposed to start at 7, and the church was 12 minutes away if you caught the lights right. I watched her taillights disappear past the maple tree at the end of our street. Then I rinsed my coffee mug, even though it was already clean. That became a pattern before I admitted it was a pattern. She had Thursday meetings, then a Tuesday follow-up, then a Saturday planning session for a fundraiser that wasn't until December. She stopped asking if I wanted to come help set up. Ellen used to rope me into everything. I had carried tables, painted nursery shelves, fixed a loose handrail by the fellowship hall, and moved boxes of canned goods more times than I could count. Suddenly, these meetings didn't need me. I asked once, "You want me to swing by after my last estimate and help stack chairs or anything?" She didn't even pause. No, it's mostly discussion tonight. That word stuck with me for some reason. Discussion. Ellen hated discussion. She liked lists, assignments, names beside tasks. She did not sit around for 2 hours talking in circles unless somebody forced her. But I let it go because letting it go was easier than becoming the kind of husband who interrogated his wife for volunteering. The first real crack came on a Sunday morning, and it was so ordinary I almost missed it. We were standing near the coffee urn after service, and Donna Mercer, the church secretary, asked Ellen if she had the meal train sign up for the Harris family. Ellen smiled and said it was in her bag. Donna said, "Good, because after last week's meeting, I wasn't sure who had the final copy." Ellen's smile stayed in place, but her hand tightened around her paper cup. I looked at Donna and said, "Last week's meeting?" Donna blinked. "The women's ministry one. Monday morning." Ellen stepped in before I could say anything else. "Donna means the email thread. We were all talking over each other." Donna nodded slowly, like maybe that was right, or maybe she just didn't want to correct Ellen in front of me. Ellen touched my elbow and said we should get moving because she had groceries to pick up before lunch. Her voice was normal, her face was normal, mine probably was too. But on the drive home, I kept thinking about that cup in her hand and the way the cardboard bent under her fingers. I didn't ask Ellen about Donna in the car. I wanted to. I had the question sitting right there in my mouth the whole ride home, but she was talking about chicken breasts being on sale and whether we still had dishwasher pods under the sink. It felt strange to interrupt normal life with something I couldn't even explain yet. That was the first time I noticed how useful normal could be. Ellen didn't act nervous after that Sunday. She didn't overcorrect or suddenly stop going out. She made lunch, changed the sheets, answered 3 church texts at the kitchen island, and asked me if I had remembered to send an estimate to a customer in Henderson. She gave me plenty of chances to decide I had imagined the whole thing. For a few days, I did exactly that. I told myself Donna had misspoken. I told myself Ellen had probably been juggling several committees, and I didn't know every meeting because I had never cared enough to keep track. That last part stung because it was partly true. Ellen had carried a lot of the social life of our marriage, and I had been happy to let her tell me where to be and when to show up. But after that, I started listening differently. Not spying, not yet, just listening. When Ellen said she had a benevolence committee meeting, I noticed whether she packed folders. When she said she was tired from a long day, I noticed whether she still had enough energy to fix her hair before leaving. When she came home, I noticed whether she smelled like church coffee and old carpet, or like the clean citrus lotion she kept in her purse. The second detail came from the calendar. Ellen kept a big paper calendar on the refrigerator because she said phone calendars made people lazy. Church items were blue, my jobs were green, family things were black. She wrote, "Committee meeting on 3 Thursdays in a row, each one from 7 to 8:30, neat as a receipt." On the second Thursday, she came home at 9:18. I know the time because I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch a basketball game I didn't care about. I had been listening for her SUV for 20 minutes. When she came in, she had that quick, busy look on her face, the one she used when she wanted to move through the room without being stopped. "Long one?" I asked. She dropped her purse on the chair by the door. "You know how church people are. Everyone has an opinion." I almost laughed because that sounded true. It was exactly the kind of thing she would say after a real meeting. She kicked off her shoes, rubbed one heel against the other, and asked if I had eaten. There was no panic in her voice, no pause that lasted too long. Just my wife standing there in our living room, telling me a sentence that fit the life we had. The next week, I asked a harmless question while she was putting leftovers into containers. I said, "Who all is on that committee now?" She didn't look up. "Which one?" "The benevolence thing." "Oh, Donna, Patty, Marlene, sometimes Warren if they need numbers from the old records." She snapped a lid onto a container. "Why?" I shrugged. "Just wondered." She looked at me then. Not hard, but carefully. "You've never wondered before." That was fair. I hated that it was fair. I said, "I know. I was thinking maybe they needed help with shelves in the storage room again." Her face softened right away. "No, honey, it's not that kind of meeting." "Honey." She didn't use it all the time, mostly when she wanted to smooth something over without making it obvious. I stood there with the dishwasher open and felt ridiculous, like I had tried to catch smoke with my hands. A few nights later, I almost checked her purse. She was in the shower, and it was sitting on the bedroom chair with the top open. I could see a church bulletin, her wallet, a pack of gum, the little zip pouch where she kept receipts. I stood beside it longer than I should have. Then I walked out of the room because I didn't like what I looked like in that moment. That was the part nobody tells you about suspicion. It doesn't make you feel sharp, it makes you feel small. You start measuring your own wife's tone. You start treating a late arrival like evidence, and then hate yourself because maybe she really was helping somebody. I typed a text one night while she was out. Can you send me a picture of the meeting room? I want to see if those shelves still look bad. I stared at it for almost a minute, then deleted it because it sounded insane. The harder thing was that Ellen became nicer during those weeks. Not overly sweet, just attentive in ways that made me question myself. She made my favorite pot roast on a Tuesday. She left a new pack of work socks on my dresser because mine had holes in the heels. She asked about a customer who had been giving me trouble and actually listened while I complained. Those things should have felt like love. Instead, they started feeling like someone keeping a room tidy before company came over. Then came the Saturday planning session. She said it was for the winter fundraiser and that they were meeting at church at 10 in the morning because evenings were getting too full. I had a cabinet estimate at 11, so I didn't think much of it until I drove past the church on my way to the customer's house. I didn't plan to check on her. I want that clear. The church was on the main road, and I passed it all the time. But when I came up to the light, I looked over before I could stop myself. The parking lot was almost empty. Donna Mercer's old Buick was there near the office entrance, and the pastor's truck was parked by the side door. Ellen's SUV wasn't there. I kept driving, my hands stayed on the wheel, and I made the turn toward the estimate like nothing had happened. For the next 40 minutes, I stood in a stranger's kitchen talking about cabinet enamel while my mind kept going back to that empty space where Ellen's car should have been. When I got home around 1, her SUV was in the driveway. She was at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing names under the word donations in blue pen. She looked up and smiled like she had been there for hours. "How was the meeting?" I asked. She tapped the pen against the paper. "Productive, actually. For once." I nodded and went to wash my hands, even though there wasn't any paint on them. In the bathroom, I locked the door and stood with both palms on the sink. I still didn't have proof of anything. I had an empty parking lot, a careful answer, and a woman at the kitchen table writing a meeting into existence after she came home. For 2 days, I did nothing with what I had seen. That sounds strange because people always think they would act the second something didn't add up. I thought that too before it was my kitchen, my wife, my calendar, my church, and a suspicion I couldn't say out loud without hearing how ugly it sounded. The next Thursday, Ellen wrote another committee meeting on the refrigerator, same blue marker, same neat block letters. She did it while I was pouring coffee before work, and she didn't even look like she was hiding anything. She stood there in her robe, hair clipped up, asking if I wanted eggs while she wrote the lie right where I kept the grocery list. I watched the marker move across the square and felt my face get hot. I almost said, "Is that one real?" It came so close I had to take a drink of coffee to keep it in my mouth. She capped the marker, stuck it back in the little magnetic holder, and said, "I may be late again. We're still working through December needs." I said, "Okay." That was all. One word. It felt weak when I said it, but I didn't know what else to do that wouldn't turn me into the bad guy before I even understood what I was accusing her of. The next morning, I stopped by the church under the excuse of checking a loose patch of paint in the youth hallway. That part wasn't completely fake. I had painted those walls 3 years earlier after a pipe leak, and the church still called me when something peeled. Donna Mercer was in the office with her reading glasses low on her nose, sorting envelopes into little wooden slots. I kept my voice casual. "Ellen said you all are buried in meetings for that benevolence stuff." Donna looked up. "Benevolence?" "Yeah, Thursdays, I think. December planning too." She pushed her glasses up and gave me the kind of look church secretaries give when they already know more than they're willing to say. "We had one finance review last month. Warren came in for that. I don't think anything regular is on the books." I laughed a little because I didn't want my face to change. Maybe I got the wrong committee. "Maybe," she said. Then she turned her monitor slightly and clicked through the church calendar. Fundraiser team meets the first Monday. Women's ministry is mornings now. Building and grounds meets next week. but you'd know if Ellen was on that one because they'd have you carrying something. She smiled when she said it. I smiled back because that was expected. Inside, I felt like somebody had put a hand on the back of my neck. Donna printed me the public facilities schedule because I asked if I could check when the youth hallway was free. It wasn't a secret document. It was the same kind of schedule posted outside the church office, with rooms reserved and group names typed beside them. I folded it and put it in my truck like it was just another scrap of paper. I sat in the parking lot longer than I meant to. The church sign out front still had last Sunday's sermon title on it. Ellen had picked that title for the bulletin because the pastor hated doing those little details himself. I stared at it through the windshield and thought about how many pieces of that place had her fingerprints on them. That night, after she left for her meeting, I took the refrigerator calendar down, I laid it flat on the dining table, and put Donna's schedule beside it. Ellen had written 5 evening meetings in 6 weeks. 4 of them had nothing matching at church. No room reserved, no committee listed, no note about benevolence. One of them lined up with a youth choir rehearsal, which made it worse somehow because I could imagine the building lit up enough that if I had driven by, I might have believed it. I took pictures of both calendars with my phone. Then I put the refrigerator calendar back exactly where it had been. I remember pressing the magnet into place and feeling ridiculous about lining it up so she wouldn't notice. That should have been enough to confront her, but it wasn't. Not for me. A false meeting proved she had lied about where she was. It did not prove there was another man. It did not prove she had not gone to help someone privately or deal with something embarrassing or sit in her car because she didn't want to come home. My mind kept offering her exits. I took every one of them for as long as I could. The next piece came from Warren Pike, and he didn't know he was handing it to me. Warren was a retired deacon, 70-something with suspenders and a habit of telling the same story twice. I ran into him at the hardware store while buying rollers. He asked how Ellen was holding up with all that counseling office running around. I kept one hand on the cart. What do you mean? He frowned like he was trying to remember if he had said too much. Maybe I've got it wrong. I just saw her SUV over by Holloway Counseling a few times. Figured the church had her helping somebody. That's the kind of thing she does. I said, yeah, probably. Warren nodded, relieved to have landed on the right explanation. Good woman, your Ellen. I thanked him and walked away with the wrong size roller covers. I didn't notice until I got to the truck. Holloway Counseling was across town in a brick office strip behind a credit union. I knew the building, but not the name. Grant Holloway had spoken at our church once about grief support after a teenager in the congregation died in a wreck. He was smooth in that soft, professional way. The kind of man who made eye contact long enough to make people feel understood. Ellen had coordinated the lunch afterward. I didn't drive by his office that day. I wanted to, and that scared me enough not to do it. Instead, I went home and checked something boring. The gas card statement for my business. Ellen had a card on the account because she sometimes picked up supplies for me or filled my truck when I left it at home. It wasn't hidden. The statements came to my email every month, and the charges were categorized by station and date. I pulled up 3 months and started matching fuel stops to the nights she had written on the church calendar. It wasn't perfect proof. Gas stations don't tell you where a person went, but the pattern made my stomach drop. On 4 of those meeting nights, she bought gas at a station near Holloway Counseling, not near the church, same station, similar times. Once at 6:48, once at 6:51, once at 6:46. The church was north of our house. That station was west, past the dental clinic and 2 miles from Grant Holloway's office. I printed the statements at my desk in the garage. The printer sounded too loud. Every page sliding out felt like it was making the house smaller. When Ellen came home that night, I had the papers in a folder under a stack of paint invoices. She kissed the side of my head while I was sitting at the kitchen table and said, "You look tired." I wanted to ask her where she had been. I wanted to say Grant's name just to watch her face. Instead, I closed the folder and said, "Long day." She opened the fridge and started talking about whether we should bring rolls to the church fundraiser. She sounded normal enough that for a few seconds I wondered if I was the one becoming dishonest. I was sitting there with printed records hidden under my own invoices, answering her like a husband, while she stood barefoot in our kitchen planning what people would eat after Sunday service. After that folder came out of the printer, I stopped sleeping like I used to. I would close my eyes beside Ellen and listen to the heater click on, then the refrigerator, then a car somewhere down the street. She slept, turned away from me most nights, phone on the nightstand face down, and I kept thinking about how close a person could be while keeping a whole part of their life out of reach. I still didn't confront her. Part of that was fear, and I'm not proud of it. I was afraid she would have an answer good enough to make me feel crazy again, or worse, an answer bad enough that I would say something I couldn't take back. I had spent half my life being the calm one in rooms where customers yelled about invoices or paint colors. At home, I was starting to feel like one wrong sentence would make me look small, so I did what I understood. I organized paper, I put Donna's facilities schedule, pictures of the refrigerator calendar, and the gas card statements in a folder in my truck under a stack of bid forms. I didn't call it evidence yet. Calling it that made it feel too real, like I had already chosen a side against my own marriage. A few days later, I opened a separate checking account at a branch Ellen didn't use. I told myself it was just practical in case things got strange with money. The teller asked if I wanted checks, and I almost laughed because the whole thing felt like something a guilty man would do. Even though I hadn't done anything except notice where my wife wasn't, I put a small portion of my next business payment into that account and hated how careful I felt walking out. The first attorney I called was from my truck with the engine off behind a Sherwin-Williams. His assistant said he was booked for 2 weeks. I thanked her and hung up because even making the appointment felt like admitting something. Then I sat there watching contractors load ladders into vans and thought about Ellen at church, touching my elbow, smiling at Donna, telling people I was patient with all her volunteering. I called another attorney before I could talk myself out of it. Calvin Reeves had an office above a title company, and he looked more tired than intimidating. I gave him the plain version because I didn't trust myself with the emotional one. I said my wife was lying about church meetings, that I had calendar conflicts and gas records, and that there might be another man connected to a counseling office. Calvin listened without acting shocked, which helped and hurt at the same time. He told me not to empty accounts, not to threaten anyone, not to show up at the counselor's office, and not to make accusations in public unless I was prepared for what came after. He said, "You don't need to prove the whole marriage in one afternoon. You need to protect yourself while you figure out what's actually provable." I remember staring at a framed photograph of his kids on a fishing dock while he talked. They were probably grown by then, but in the picture they were little, sunburned and grinning. It made me think of all the ordinary photos Ellen and I had, church picnics and Christmas parties and beach trips where we looked like people who knew where they stood with each other. When I got home, Ellen was making a list for the fundraiser. It was a Saturday spaghetti dinner to raise money for emergency rent assistance, and she had taken over ticket sales because, in her words, nobody else can count change without turning it into a federal case. She had envelopes spread across the kitchen table, names written in her careful handwriting. Mine was on one of them because I had agreed weeks earlier to help set up tables. "You still good for Friday night?" she asked. I stood at the sink washing my hands, even though I had already washed them at the shop. "For setup?" She looked up. "Yes, Russ, for setup." There was a little edge in her voice. Not guilt, exactly. More like irritation that I had made her repeat something she considered settled. I dried my hands slowly and said, "Yeah, I'll be there." She smiled then, satisfied. "Good. I need you on my side that night. People listen to you when they start complaining." That sentence stayed with me. I need you on my side. I don't think she meant it the way I heard it, but by then every normal sentence had another room behind it. She wanted me standing beside her at church, carrying tables, shaking hands, being the husband who made her look stable. The night I almost confronted her was the Tuesday before the fundraiser. She said she had one last committee check-in and came out of the bedroom wearing a dark green blouse. I had bought her for our anniversary. I was sitting at the end of the bed, tying my work boots, even though I wasn't going anywhere. She asked if I knew where her silver earrings were, and I said they were probably in the small dish by the mirror. She put them on and gave me a quick smile. "How do I look?" I looked at her for too long. I thought about Grant Holloway seeing that blouse. I thought about Warren saying, "Good woman, you're Ellen," in the hardware store. I thought about the gas station near that brick office strip and the refrigerator calendar downstairs with another blue lie written across the square. "You look like you're not going to church," I said. Her hand stopped near her ear. The room got very still, but not in a dramatic way. It was just our bedroom with a laundry basket by the closet and one of my socks half under the dresser. She stared at me for maybe 2 seconds, then gave a short laugh. What's that supposed to mean? I had the whole folder in my truck. I had Calvin's warning in my head. I had enough anger in my chest to ruin whatever advantage I had, and I could feel myself wanting to do exactly that. Instead, I stood up, picked up my keys, and said, "Nothing. I'm tired." She watched me leave the room. I went out to the garage and sat in my truck until I saw her SUV pull out. I didn't follow her. I just sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, breathing through my nose like that was some kind of plan. By Friday, I knew the confrontation was coming, whether I wanted it or not. Ellen had started talking about the fundraiser like it was her proof of goodness, like one successful night in a church fellowship hall could hold up the whole version of herself she wanted people to see. I put the folder in a plain manila envelope and wrote the dates on the front. Then I slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket before we left for the church. The fellowship hall smelled like sauce, garlic bread, and that old wax they used on the floor before big events. Ellen was already moving like she owned the room. She had a clipboard in one hand, a pen tucked behind her ear, and 3 people waiting to ask her questions before she had even taken off her coat. I carried tables from the storage closet and set them where she pointed. That was what I had done for years. Ellen told me where the heavy things went, and I moved them. People smiled at us like we were a team. One older woman said, "You two always make this look easy," and Ellen laughed and touched my arm. I remember looking down at her hand on my sleeve. It was such a small thing, but it made me feel used in a way I hadn't let myself name yet. She wasn't just lying to me. She was still using me as part of the picture, right there in front of people who trusted her. Grant Holloway showed up around 6. I didn't know if he would, but part of me expected it. He came through the side door wearing a gray sport coat and carrying a stack of donation envelopes like he belonged there. He had that calm counselor face on, polite and soft, nodding to people as they greeted him. Ellen saw him from across the room, and for half a second, her whole posture changed. It wasn't much. She didn't run to him. She didn't smile like a teenager. Her shoulders just dropped a little, like she had been holding herself tight and then remembered where comfort was. Then she looked toward me. I was standing near the drink table with a case of water in my hands. I set it down slowly. She looked away first. I still didn't say anything. I helped the youth group boys plug in the coffee urn. I fixed one wobbly table leg with a folded napkin. I stood beside Ellen while she greeted a city councilman who had come for the photo in the church newsletter. Every minute I stayed quiet made her more confident, and I could see it happening. After the prayer, Ellen walked up front to thank everyone. She was good at that sort of thing. She thanked the volunteers, thanked the donors, thanked the pastor for trusting the committee, and then she looked right at me. "And I have to thank my husband, Russ," she said, smiling like she had practiced it. "He is my rock. He puts up with all my late nights, all my meetings, all my running around for this church." People turned and smiled at me. Some clapped. I felt my face get warm, but I didn't move. Ellen kept looking at me, still smiling, like she had put me in my place without anyone else knowing there was a place to put me. That was when I knew I wasn't going to carry her lie for one more minute. I walked to the front, not fast. A few people probably thought I was going to hug her or say something sweet. Ellen's smile held until I got close enough for her to see the envelope in my hand. Her eyes went down to it, then back up to me. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. I kept my voice low. "Not here in front of everyone." Her smile tightened. "Russ, side room," I said. She looked past me toward the crowd. Grant was standing near the back with a paper plate in his hand, watching too carefully. Ellen gave a little laugh for the room, like this was some husband and wife joke, and said, "Give us 1 second." The side room was where they kept Sunday school supplies and extra hymnals. I closed the door but didn't lock it. Ellen turned around before I even spoke. "You are embarrassing me," she said. I took the folder out of the envelope and placed it on the small table between us. "No, I'm giving you a chance not to embarrass yourself worse." Her eyes sharpened. "What is this? The church facilities schedule? Our refrigerator calendar? Gas card statements? Dates you said you were here? Dates you weren't?" She didn't touch the papers at first. She stared at them like they might become something else if she waited. Then she picked up the top page and flipped once, too quickly to read. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You made a file on me? I matched dates. You were checking up on me? I was trying to understand why my wife kept saying she was at church when the church had no meeting. Her face changed then, but not into confession. It went into defense. There are things I handle that don't get put on the public calendar. Donna printed that for room access. Warren saw your SUV at Holloway Counseling. The gas card shows the same station for meeting nights. She looked at me when I said Warren's name. That landed harder than the statements. Her mouth opened a little, then closed. "This is not what you think," she said. I nodded once. "Then tell me what it is." She looked toward the door. I could hear plates and chairs and people talking outside, the normal church noise pressing against the room. For once, all that noise wasn't helping her. "I needed someone to talk to," she said. "You weren't listening to me anymore." I stood there for a second because that answer still found a place to hurt. Even after the lying, even with the folder on the table, a part of me wanted to stop and ask what I had missed. Then I looked at the gas statements again. "For months?" I asked. She rubbed her forehead. "It got complicated. Did Grant know you were using church meetings as the excuse?" She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. Her eyes dropped to the table, and I felt anger move through me in a colder way than before. The door opened a few inches. Grant stood there looking between us. "Everything okay?" Ellen said, "Grant, don't." I looked at him and said, "You should probably leave before the pastor asks why my wife's counselor is in this room with us." He went pale in the most ordinary way, not movie pale, just a man suddenly realizing he was connected to paperwork, witnesses, and a room full of people who knew his name. He stepped back and said, "I think this is between you two." That was his whole character, right there. Soft voice, clean exit. Ellen whispered, "Russ, please don't do this tonight." "You did it tonight," I said. "You thanked me for believing your meetings." She sat down then, like her knees had gotten tired. I didn't feel powerful watching it. I felt sick. I told her I had already spoken to an attorney and that I would not be going home with her until we had separate sleeping arrangements figured out. She said my name 3 times, each one smaller than the last. When we walked back into the hall, people noticed. Of course they did. Ellen's face was too stiff, and Grant was gone. Donna Mercer looked from Ellen to me and then down at the envelope in my hand. She didn't ask anything. The first consequence came before dessert was even cleared. The pastor pulled Ellen aside after Donna spoke to him, and by the time I left, Ellen had been asked to step back from handling donations until questions about the committee schedule were sorted out. It wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No crowd turning on her. Just one quiet decision made in a side office while spaghetti sauce dried on paper plates. For Ellen, that was worse than yelling. Someone had taken the clipboard out of her hands. I didn't go home with Ellen that night. I slept in my truck for about 20 minutes behind my shop, then realized I was 48 years old and being stubborn for no useful reason. I called my brother Nolan and asked if his guest room was still full of hunting gear. He didn't ask many questions. He just said, "I'll move it." The next morning, Ellen called me 7 times before 10. I answered the 8th because Calvin had told me not to disappear completely. Her voice was rough, like she had either been crying or making herself sound like she had. "You humiliated me," she said. I was sitting on Nolan's back porch with coffee that had gone cold. "You thanked me in front of a room full of people for believing a lie. That is not fair." I almost laughed, but I didn't. There are moments where laughing would make you feel worse than yelling. I said, "No, it isn't." For the first week, Ellen tried to keep the story small. She told people she had been getting pastoral adjacent counseling and that I misunderstood the schedule. Then someone asked why Grant Holloway had stopped answering calls from the church. Someone else mentioned that he had canceled his grief support follow-up session. Donna didn't gossip exactly, but Donna had a way of answering direct questions with enough silence around the answer that people understood the shape of it. Grant protected himself fast. He sent Ellen one email, which she forwarded to me later in some attempt to prove the relationship had been emotionally confused. It was 2 paragraphs of professional distance. He said he cared about her well-being, but he could not be involved in a marital dispute or any matter connected to church programming. He didn't say love. He didn't say future. He didn't say anything a lawyer could grab with both hands. That hurt Ellen more than I expected. Not because she admitted it, but because she got quiet in a different way. When we finally sat across from each other at Calvin's office with her attorney beside her, she looked less like a woman defending love and more like someone who had stepped off a curb and found out there was no street under her foot. The divorce was not some clean victory. People like to imagine the wronged person walks in with a folder and walks out with a house, the money, and a standing ovation. That is not how it worked. Our state did not care much about adultery unless money or custody or direct harm was tied to it. We did not have kids, so there was no custody fight. The house still had both our names on it. The accounts still had to be divided. Ellen's lawyer said more than once that embarrassment was not a legal asset. But the records mattered. They mattered because Ellen had used my business gas card on nights she claimed to be doing church work. They mattered because she had leaned on her volunteer role to cover personal behavior. They mattered because when she tried to argue I had suddenly abandoned the marriage, Calvin laid out the dates and showed that I had waited, documented, and kept paying the bills while she kept repeating the same lie. In the end, I bought out her share of the house for less than she wanted because she wanted the process finished before more people asked questions. She moved into a townhouse near the dental clinic and kept her job there, but she stepped down from every church role. The pastor called it a season of rest. Ellen hated that phrase. She had spent years being the person with the keys, the list, the clipboard, and the final say. Suddenly, other women were organizing meal trains without her. Some people were kind to her. I need to say that because it is true. A few told me marriages were complicated and that nobody outside a home knew what really went on inside it. One man at church avoided my eyes for months like betrayal was contagious. Donna brought me a casserole I did not ask for and said, "You don't have to talk about it." I appreciated that more than any advice I got. Ellen and I spoke a few times after the papers were signed. Mostly practical things. A box of Christmas ornaments, a warranty file for the dishwasher, the tax document she had forgotten in a cabinet. Once, standing in the driveway beside her SUV, she said, "I was lonely, Russ." I looked at the house behind me, the same house where she had written those meetings in blue marker, and I said, "You could have said that before you made me part of the cover." She wiped her cheek quickly, angry that I had seen it. I didn't know how. Maybe that was true. Maybe she had been lonely. Maybe I had missed things because I was tired and busy and too comfortable letting the marriage run on habits. I have had to sit with that part. But loneliness did not write fake meetings on our refrigerator. Loneliness did not let me carry tables at a fundraiser while another man stood in the same room knowing more about my marriage than I did. I still go to that church sometimes, though not every Sunday. I sit farther back now. The refrigerator calendar is gone, and I use the one on my phone like a normal person who no longer trusts Blue Marker as much as he used to. I kept the house, but for a long time it felt less like winning and more like walking around inside the place where I had been useful to someone else's lie. What I got back was smaller than revenge and more practical than peace. I got mornings where I knew where my money went. I got evenings where I wasn't waiting for an SUV to pull into the driveway with another story attached to it. I got the right to stop being the patient husband in a picture Ellen controlled. If this story stayed with you, hit like, share it with someone who understands how quiet betrayal actually works, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Do you think Russ was right to expose Ellen at the fundraiser after she publicly called him her rock? Should church leaders have removed her from volunteer control immediately, or was that too harsh before the divorce was final? And if someone says they cheated because they were lonely, how much does that explain, and how much is just another way to manage the damage?